In honor of Chavdal Teves, the Milula, the anniversary of the passing of the Alter Rebbe, thought it would be appropriate to review the Alter Rebbe's novel interpretation on the mitzvah, on the fundamental mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel. The foundation of Chassidus is learning to love another fully and truly as yourself. Famous story, the Baal Shem Tov was orphaned from his father, the Hidden Tzaddik Rebbe Eliezer, at the age of 5. The last words spoken to him by his holy father before he passed away were, Yisroelik, fear nothing except for Hashem alone. Love every single Jew without exception, with the full depth of your heart and with the fire of your soul, no matter who he is or how he behaves. That's the foundation of Chassidus. But what does it mean? A little over 2,000 years ago, in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land of Israel, Shammai is studying Torah when he's disturbed by a visitor. It's a non-Jew who's looking to convert to Judaism. But there's a catch. He says, convert me on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot. We can only imagine what went through Shammai's head. What sacrilege. We spend our whole lives studying Torah only to scratch the surface. The audacity of this man to think that he can be taught it all in a moment. What we do know is Shammai's actual reaction. He was holding a yardstick and he used it to chase the man away. The prospective convert didn't give up. He went to Hillel with the same requests. And this time he was successful. Hillel converted him, and then he said, what is hateful to you, do not do to your friend. This is the entire Torah, the rest is commentary. Now go and learn. A generation later, Rabbi Akiva would make a similar pronouncement. Love your fellow Jew as yourself. Ahavta l'reacha kamoicha. Zeklal gadol b'Torah. This is the great principle of the Torah. But what does it mean? There's 613 mitzvahs. All are important. All are Hashem's will. How can we say that one mitzvah, Ahavas Yisroel, is considered the basis of all of them? Not only that, there are many mitzvahs that are ben adam l'chaveirei, dictate interpersonal relationships, such as laws against stealing, governing damages, and so on. But there's also many of the mitzvahs that are purely ben adam l'makim, between man and Hashem. So what connection does love of a fellow, does Ahavas Yisroel, have to mitzvahs like Shabbos or kosher and the like? Rashi actually offers two possible resolutions to this question. Either, he says, we have to reinterpret the meaning of your friend, that Hillel says, your friend or your fellow, that it refers not to your actual friend, to another person, but it actually refers to Hashem. According to that, what Hillel is saying is, just as it's hateful to you if people don't listen to what you say, don't go against the word of Hashem. Or, says Rashi, we need to reinterpret the meaning of Kol HaTorah Kula. This is the entire Torah. And say that it doesn't mean all of the mitzvahs of the Torah, but just most of the mitzvahs of the Torah. Because Ahavas Yisroel is the basis of all the mitzvahs, ben adam l'chaveirei, the interpersonal mitzvahs. Because obviously, what's hateful to you, to steal, to murder, those are things that are hateful to you, so you can't do to somebody else. But it's not, in fact, the basis of the rest of the Torah. Both of these interpretations, of course, aren't explaining the literal meaning of Hillel's statement. How could Ahavas Yisrael, how could love of a fellow Jew, be seen as the basis of the entire Torah? An even more fundamental question is, how is it even possible to love your fellow as yourself? A person loves themselves naturally. You don't have any conditions, no prodding that's needed. At best, we'll love another person conditionally, because we have an understanding of their positive qualities, because the benefits we get from them, from our association with them. Even if we're able to transcend that dependent love, because the Torah tells us to, it still wouldn't be the same as the way we love ourselves, because that doesn't need any prodding, doesn't need any instruction. So what does the Torah even mean when it tells us to love your fellow as yourself? So that brings us to the Alter Rebbe. First, the story the Rebbe tells about the Alter Rebbe. The shul was packed. The holiest day of the year, it's Yom Kippur. Chassidim had gathered from all around to bask in the holy presence of their Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe. What a great merit to be with the Alter Rebbe on this holy day. But that year, in the middle of davening, the Alter Rebbe stopped davening. He took off his tallis. He left the shul. Where could he have gone? Later, people found out that on the edge of town there was a poor woman who had recently given birth. Her family members were all preoccupied with Yom Kippur. She had been left with her baby to fend for herself. The Alter Rebbe sensed that her life was in danger. He stopped his davening, went to the edge of town, chopped wood, cooked a soup, and fed it to the poor woman to revive her. Such was his Ahavas Yisroel. He did all this himself instead of finding somebody to delegate it to. The Alter Rebbe is known as the Baal HaTanya. He wrote Tanya. And in that seminal work, for the first time, the depths of Chassidic teaching were systematically arranged, made accessible for anybody who chooses to learn it. The Alter Rebbe spent over 20 years writing the Tanya, refining and fine-tuning each and every word. So when in the final draft of Tanya, an entire perek, an entire chapter was added, it was certainly no accident, neither the content nor where it was placed. The Alter Rebbe added Perek Lamed Beis, chapter 32, an entire perek that's dedicated to an in-depth analysis of the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel. Perek Lamed Beis, of course, means in Lashon Kodesh, in Hebrew, it spells out leiv, or heart. This perek is the heart. It's the beating heart of the Tanya. Just as a heart pulsates, pumping oxygen-rich blood that gives life to every part of the body, Ahavas Yisroel is at the very heart of Chassidus. It gives life and vitality to every one of the teachings of Chassidus. The very first Farbrengen, when the Rebbe accepted being Rebbe on Yud Shvat, Tafshin Yud Aleph, he declared that here in America people love a statement. Said the Rebbe, my statement is that the three loves, love of Hashem, love of the Torah, and love of a fellow Jew, are all one. It's impossible to divide between them because they're all one essence. In this perek, the Alter Rebbe explains the Chassidic depth to Ahavas Yisroel. Chassidus is Pnimiyus HaTorah, the inner essence of the Torah, and it's Nishmasa D'Oraisa, the soul of the Torah. Just as you can't truly know who a person is and what makes them tick just by awareness of the outer shell of the body, we need to uncover the spiritual essence of the Torah in order to truly understand and grasp the vitality that's contained within its stories, within its laws. Along the way, that deeper insight into the core of the mitzvah will also answer many of the questions, including the questions we asked. What does it mean to love someone as yourself? How can we be instructed to love altogether? What if we don't have that emotional feeling? We can be instructed to behave as if we love, but how can we be instructed to actually feel love? And how can that love be equally applied to every Jew, regardless of their own qualities or failings? Why is this mitzvah considered the basis of the entire Torah, even of the parts that seem to be completely unrelated? What do we hope to achieve when fulfilling a mitzvah? All of these questions are byproducts of the Alter Rebbe's approach to Ahavas Yisroel. And it starts with shifting our perspective. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was a young boy, he was once sitting in Cheder looking out the window. So his tutor, the Rashbat, said to him, always remember, Yosef Yitzchak, that it's better to be on the outside looking in than on the inside looking out. Perspective really matters. The way we look at things really matters. The basic premise of the Alter Rebbe's approach to Ahavas Yisroel is a simple one. It starts with a fundamental shift in our perspective. If we look at the world through the perspective of the body, of the material world, we can't possibly ever attain true Ahavas Yisroel. If we learn to make our souls primary, the neshama the main thing, then loving a Jew truly as yourself becomes something that's completely natural and ingrained. Because the question is simply, who am I? If I'm my body, if I'm my physical self, then I'm not you and you're not me. Then I can never truly love you as I love myself. Because my love for you will always be predicated on qualities, on benefits. I'll always have a greater attraction to you if you're a greater person, if you're a better person, if you have greater qualities, if you can do more for me. And of course, a lesser attraction if those things are missing. And even if I do love you, by definition, it's an independent love, an instructed love. That's already not as I love myself. If I'm my neshama, however, then everything shifts. If I see the world through a spiritual prism, through a spiritual lens, then the reality I look at isn't that of the material world. On the soul level, on the level of the neshama, love for everybody else already exists. Naturally, completely, without any reservation. The Alter Rebbe breaks this down into three progressively deeper reasons why on a neshama level, on a soul level, we truly love every Jew. First, he says, we can't know the value of a soul of a neshama. So this perception of valuing the other person's soul, the other person's neshama, as greater or smaller, exalted or lowly, falls apart completely. Because that can only be true in external things, not when you're talking about the true spiritual standing of the essence of a neshama. Secondly, even higher, all souls are actually equal. It's not just that we don't know whose neshama is greater than the other. There really are no differences, because a neshama is a neshama. A soul is a soul. The differences between people fall away completely if we shift our perspective from the differentiated body to the equality that's contained in the soul, that's contained in the neshama. And most importantly, says the Alter Rebbe, the truth is that all souls share the same source. That means that we're not just equal, we're actually one. The entire separation between me and you is just an external thing. It's a body thing, a body perspective. But if I see past that, then I begin to see reality for what it truly is, that we're truly one and the same. And then, just as I love myself, naturally without reservation, I naturally and without reservation love every single other Yid. Because they are me and I am them. We're one. The Yerushalmi tells us something very interesting. It says, why shouldn't you take revenge against somebody who did something wrong to you? Says the Talmud Yerushalmi, imagine you're cutting meat with one hand and accidentally you slice your other hand. Would you imagine avenging yourself on the hand that's holding the knife? So too, says the Yerushalmi, all Yidden are truly one body. That's this point that the Alter Rebbe is making. There's a story about a student came to the Mashpia, Reb Chanei Handel, and he complains. He said, I lack Ahavas Yisroel. How could I strengthen my Ahavas Yisroel? Said Reb Chanei Handel, a guy naturally hates a Yid. A Yid, on the other hand, naturally loves every other Yid. So if you get rid of the guy in you and awaken the Jew in you, you'll automatically have Ahavas Yisroel. In other words, this is the perspective the Alter Rebbe is teaching us, that the true Ahavas Yisroel is based on looking at the world from the perspective of the neshama, from the perspective of the soul, and on that level we're all one. So the love that for every Yid is there naturally within us. It's part and parcel of who we are. Which brings us to the next points of why Ahavas Yisroel could be seen as truly the entire Torah. The Alter Rebbe told over what the Maggid of Mezrich taught him in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. Said, V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha, love your fellow as yourself, is an explanation and a commentary on V'ahavta es Hashem alekecha, love Hashem your God. Because when you love a Jew, you're loving Hashem. Because every Jew has within them a soul, a neshama that's a part, a chelik, a lekami, mal, mamish, a part of Hashem above. When you love a Jew, his inner essence, you're in fact loving Hashem. Hillel called loving a fellow Jew the entire Torah, and the rest just commentary. And with this new, deeper insight into Ahavas Yisroel, that it's all about making our souls, our spiritual consciousness primary, and our bodies, our material consciousness secondary, we can now understand that he actually means that literally. Because it's not just the basis of Ben Adam L'Chaveirei, of interpersonal mitzvahs, or a reference to listening to Hashem and the like Rashi explains. But rather, the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel is in fact literally the basis, the root principle of the entire Torah. Because what's Torah about? The word mitzvah comes from the word savsa, the Aramaic word to connect. The essence of the Torah, of the mitzvahs, is about connecting to Hashem. There's no greater way of connecting to Hashem than through Ahavas Yisroel, than through shifting our perspective from being that of the body to becoming the perspective of the neshama, and recognizing that we're truly one with all our fellow Yidden. Specifically, that's achieved in two ways, in Halah and Hamshacha. We connect to Hashem in two directions, elevating our world to a divine consciousness, or drawing down a lakus, drawing down godliness into our reality. Both of these are exemplified in the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel. Because as explained above, loving a fellow Jew is achieved through elevating our neshama perspective over that of our body. More specifically, it's achieved not just by elevating our neshama over our body, but actually elevating our neshama to its original source in Hashem. Because only then is it truly free of the egotistical physical perspective that makes it see itself as a distinct entity, as a separate existence. When fully elevated, the neshama becomes completely subsumed in the consciousness, in the perspective of Hashem, of its source, and then it truly feels itself as part of the whole. That process is, in fact, kala teira kula. That's the entire teira. In other words, that's the purpose and end goal of all of the mitzvahs, all of the connections we do are ahala, to elevate our neshama, both over the guf, over the body, but more importantly, all the way to its original source. The second way is hamshacha, drawing godliness down to be manifest and revealed in our world. And that's only possible when the world is prepared as a vessel for elikus, as a keli for godliness. The Zayar tells us, Hashem only dwells in a place that's perfect. If a Yid feels himself as separate from other Yidden, if he sees the world from the perspective of the body and the material distinction, then that's the definition of imperfection. It's like a limb separated from the body. So again, the end goal of all of Torah, which is in hamshacha, to manifest godliness into our world and connect to Hashem through the mitzvahs, is only truly possible when we absorb the message of Ahavas Yisroel and express our oneness with each other. The Frierdiker Rebbe once told of a certain tzaddik who cried bitterly when one of his children fell ill. Later, he complained that he realized he wouldn't have cried quite the same way over another Jewish child as he did for his own. This proved, he said, that he was only at the very beginning of his Avodas Hashem. True Avodas Hashem is when we see each other all as one, when we're able to truly connect, when we're able to see the world from the perspective of the neshama. Chassidim asked the Alter Rebbe, which is greater, loving Hashem or loving your fellow Jew? So he responded, both are engraved in the soul of every single Yid. But the verse, the pasuk tells us clearly, Ahavti eschem, Amar Hashem, I have loved you, says Hashem. It follows, therefore, said the Alter Rebbe, that Ahavas Yisroel is greater. Because when you love a fellow Jew, you're loving what your beloved loves. That's the heart of Tanya, the heart of Chassidus. To love your fellow Jew truly, literally as yourself. Because from the perspective of the neshama, he or she is you. And that recognition depends simply on how you see yourself. Are you the physical body, the outer shell, that the material expression? Then you're separate, you're self-centered, you're only capable of dependent love of another person at best. But if you're the neshama, the spiritual soul, the inner essence, then you're truly nothing separate from the other. And you're both part of something that's much deeper and much more meaningful reality, a reality of Gili Elokus, of divine revelation, of spiritual connection, a reality where we can ascend to the highest spiritual heights and bring that godliness, bring that divine revelation down into our world. How is that accomplished? It starts with action, doing something for somebody else, putting their needs before our own, caring about the physical and spiritual well-being of another Jew, and taking action to improve it. The Alter Rebbe told his son, the Mittler Rebbe, grandfather, Zayda, as he called the Baal Shem Tov, says that we need to have Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice for Ahavas Yisroel, even for a Jew we've never met before. Similarly, the Baal Shem Tov taught that a neshama could come down into this world and live for 70, 80 years just to do a favor for another Yid, a spiritual favor, or even a physical one, even a material one. And finally, Ahavas Yisroel is the preparation for the coming of Mashiach. The Rebbe tells us in Hayom Yom, a quote from the Frierdiker Rebbe, he says, in this time of the footsteps of Mashiach, it's the obligation of every Jew to seek to do good for his fellow, to seek to do something for another Yid, old or young. Encourage that other Yid to do tshuva and awaken them to do tshuva so that they too can be included amongst the Jewish people who will merit the complete and total geula. With the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel, with the perspective of Ahavas Yisroel that the Alter Rebbe gives us, shifting our perspective from seeing the world through the material, physical perspective to seeing the world from the perspective of the neshama, that enables us to truly, completely love every single other Yid, regardless of who they are, to act upon it, and ultimately to bring us a step closer to to the coming of Mashiach, when there'll be revealed that true oneness within the world, and again reconnect all Yidden and all of the Yidden with the Eibishter.